The United States did not win World War II through a single battle, a single general, or a single moment of heroism. America won the war through something far less dramatic on the surface, but far more decisive in reality: industrial power. Long before the final shots were fired in Europe and the Pacific, the outcome of the war was being shaped on factory floors, in shipyards, and along endless assembly lines that stretched across the American continent. While armies clashed on distant fronts, the United States was transforming its economy into the most powerful engine of war the world had ever seen, producing weapons, vehicles, and supplies on a scale that no enemy could match or resist. When the war began in Europe, the United States was not yet a combatant, but it was already preparing for a conflict of unprecedented scope. American leaders understood that modern war would not be decided by courage alone, but by logistics, production, and the ability to sustain combat over years rather than months. The American economy, still recovering from the Great Depression, possessed enormous latent potential. Once mobilized, it could convert civilian industry into military production with astonishing speed. Factories that once produced cars, refrigerators, and household goods were retooled to manufacture tanks, aircraft, and artillery. Shipyards expanded overnight, and new ones were built from scratch. This transformation was not gradual, it was explosive. Unlike the Axis powers, the United States approached war production with an emphasis on standardization and efficiency rather than technical perfection. American weapons were not always the most advanced, but they were reliable, easy to maintain, and produced in massive quantities. This philosophy proved decisive. Tanks like the Sherman, aircraft like the B-17 and B-24, and ships like the Liberty and Victory classes were designed for rapid production and easy repair. Parts were interchangeable, assembly processes were simplified, and production lines ran around the clock. The result was an industrial output so vast that it overwhelmed the Axis not through innovation alone, but through sheer volume. The scale of American production defied imagination. By the middle years of the war, the United States was producing tens of thousands of aircraft annually, launching ships faster than German submarines could sink them, and supplying not only its own forces, but those of its allies as well. Britain and the Soviet Union depended heavily on American material, delivered through vast logistical networks that spanned oceans and continents. Trucks, locomotives, fuel, food, and ammunition flowed continuously toward the front lines. This logistical superiority allowed Allied commanders to plan large-scale operations with confidence, knowing that supplies would arrive when needed. War, at this level, became a test of systems rather than individual units, and the American system proved unmatched. Equally important was the American workforce. Millions of men and women entered factories, many for the first time, driven by a shared sense of purpose. Women became a central part of the industrial effort, filling roles once reserved for men and redefining the American labor force. These workers were not simply producing weapons, they were sustaining the war itself. Morale on the home front became a strategic asset. The American population accepted rationing, long hours, and intense pressure because the war was framed as a collective effort, a fight for survival and values rather than conquest. This unity allowed production to continue without the internal fractures that plagued many other wartime economies. American industrial power also shaped strategy. Because the United States could produce and transport enormous quantities of equipment, Allied commanders could afford losses that would have crippled other nations. Aircraft could be replaced, ships repaired or rebuilt, and divisions re-equipped. This did not mean American lives were treated carelessly, but it did mean that operational setbacks were temporary rather than decisive. The Axis powers, by contrast, often faced permanent losses when equipment or trained personnel were destroyed. Over time, this imbalance turned battles into equations the Axis could not solve. The impact of American industry was felt most clearly in the later stages of the war. As Allied forces advanced into Europe and across the Pacific, their momentum was sustained by a continuous flow of supplies. Roads, airfields, and ports were constructed almost as quickly as territory was captured. The ability to move fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements across vast distances allowed the United States to fight a truly global war. Germany and Japan, lacking comparable industrial depth and logistical reach, found themselves increasingly isolated and exhausted. No matter how determined their resistance, they were facing an enemy whose strength grew stronger with time rather than weaker. By the final years of the conflict, the outcome was no longer in doubt. The United States had achieved what no nation before it had accomplished: the full integration of industrial power, logistics, and military strategy on a global scale. Victory was not the result of a single innovation or moment of brilliance, but of sustained production, coordination, and endurance. American industry did not merely support the war effort, it defined it. The factories of the United States became weapons in their own right, shaping the battlefield long before soldiers arrived. World War II demonstrated a fundamental truth about modern warfare. Wars between industrial powers are won not only by those who fight the hardest, but by those who can produce, supply, and endure the longest. The United States emerged from the conflict not just victorious, but transformed. Its industrial mobilization laid the foundation for its role as a global superpower in the decades that followed. The war was won on many fronts, but its ultimate outcome was forged in steel, oil, and assembly lines stretching from coast to coast. If you found this documentary interesting and want to explore more stories about history from a strategic and detailed perspective, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. See you soon.